Hello everyone and welcome back to Elsie's Young Learning Emporium. In today's video, we're going to be looking at cells. Here's an overview of what we're going to look at in this video. So 1. What are cells? 2. Prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. 3. Their structures. And 4. Overview of organelles inside each type. So let's begin. To start with, let's travel back in time, all the way back to 1600s. Robert Hooke, he was looking at tiny pieces of cork, which is wood, under microscope and saw small box-like structures. He called them cells. The 1800s. Scientists noticed that animals had these structures too, and not only plants. Also, a scientist named Robert Brown studied plants and discovered that cells had a nucleus, which is a central part that controls the cell. Now moving forward into the 1830s, two scientists, Matthias Schleiden and Theodor Schwann, studied these cells closely and proposed that all plants are made up of cells and all animals are made up of cells, and also cells are the basic unit of life. Then, in the 1850s, another scientist added on his understanding that all cells come from some pre-existing cells. This means that cells divide to form new cells. These make up the cell theory. So our current understanding is that all living things are made up of cells, the cell is the basic unit of life, and all cells come from pre-existing cells. So, the main question is, what are they? You can think of them as tiny living factories. Everything an organism does starts with its cells. So you need your cells in order to survive. Now, there are two types of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Let's look at prokaryotic cells first. You can see that prokaryotic starts with PR. I like to think of PR as pre, which shows that these cells evolved before the eukaryotic cells, so they are kind of much more simpler than eukaryotic cells. So, at a closer look, prokaryotic cells are quite simple, as I said before. They've got no nucleus, and their DNA material is a single circular DNA strand found in the cytoplasm. And also, they've got no membrane-bound organelles. Basically, organelles are tiny organs in the cell which perform little tasks, and together they help the cell function as a whole. So let's look at a prokaryotic cell real quick. So starting with, prokaryotic cells have no nucleus, so as you can see, there are just DNA strands like that over there. So since the DNA cannot be in a nucleus, it is instead present in an area called the nucleoid, which is just like a central area where the DNA is. Also, there is circular DNA strands over here, but it is really coiled, so that's why it might not look very circular. Also, this is just an animated picture, so that's also why it doesn't look very circular. Next, prokaryotic cells do not have any membrane-bound organelles. So before we look at organelles, just a real quick note, there is a cytoplasm, which is a jelly-like fluid which fills up the cell where all the chemical reactions and the organelles are. An organelle which is in the prokaryotic cell is the ribosome, which is basically the protein synthesis factory. And then there are some organelles that only some prokaryotes have, such as the pili and flagella. So, prokaryotic type of cells are found in two types of organisms, bacteria and archaea. Now, let's look at eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells have the little term "eu" in them, which I think of them as new. So "you" and "new" kind of rhyme, right? So these cells are newer because they came after the prokaryotic cells, and they are more developed and complex than prokaryotic cells. So a closer description of eukaryotic cells would be that they have nucleus that store their DNA, they contain membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria and the endoplasmic reticulum, and these cells are usually larger and more complex than prokaryotic cells, as we mentioned before. So let's see a diagram of a eukaryotic cell. So first up, eukaryotic cells have nucleus. So the little yellow ball in the center of the cell is the nucleus, which is the control center of the cell, and it stores the DNA. Then, the little green ball inside the nucleus is the nucleolus, and it is a small part which makes ribosomes. Next up, these cells have membrane-bound organelles. So an example of this can be the purple organelle, which is the endoplasmic reticulum. Now just saying there won't be these kind of colors in a real cell, this is just for illustration. So the endoplasmic reticulum helps make and transport proteins and fats in the cell. Another membrane-bound organelle that the eukaryotic cell has is the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. And another example would be the Golgi apparatus, which packages, modifies, and sorts proteins and lipids for transport to other parts of the cell or outside the cell. Now, eukaryotic cells are really complex, so they've got lots of little organelles and lots of other processes that take place, and I could do another video on that, which I might in the future, so stay tuned for that. So, going back to prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, here's a little comparison kind of thing where you can see what the prokaryotic cell has and what the eukaryotic cell has. Now, as we saw before, prokaryotic cells are present in bacteria and archaea. However, eukaryotic cells are present in organisms like animals, plants, fungi, and protists. So in conclusion, here's what we looked at. See if you can answer the question, which is what are cells, and talk about the three other topics, which is prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, their structures, and the organelles inside them. So just an overview of them. See if you can do that, and if you can, good job. So that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, comment them down below and I'll try my best to answer them. And if you do have any other requests for videos, do comment that below as well, because I would love to make videos about things that you guys would want to know more about. That's it for this video. Bye!